Hello, everyone. Welcome to State of Customer Experience in Distribution from Distribution Strategy Group. It's one of our best practice series. My name is Ian Heller with Distribution Strategy Group. Delighted to be joined by our main presenter today and the latest member of our senior management team, our very own Chief Customer Officer, Brian Hopkins. Brian, how are you today?
I am excellent, Ian. Looking forward to this today. And I'm a poor man's Jonathan Vine, but I'll do my best.
Well, it's pretty cool event. I don't know about that, but it's a pretty cool event because we're going to be sharing absolutely proprietary data. I mean, it's ours, right? That is reported from dozens of distributors who use our customer experience NBS tool. You can't get this data anywhere else in the world. It's 18,000 plus distributor customers reporting back on what's important to them from distributors and how distributors are performing against it. It's just a completely unique data set. But before we do that, I got to do one commercial. We have an event coming up called Applied AI for Distributors. You know, it's funny because I watched a bunch of the ChatGPT release stuff this week, which is mind blowing. I mean, it'll translate an audio in real time from between 50 different languages. It's got vision now. It can, it's, if you haven't watched the demos, they're absolutely mind blowing. And it just so happens that we got Zach Cass, who was part of the original ChatGPT launch team. He was part of that company until less than a year ago. He was their head of go-to-market, and he's one of the amazing keynote speakers at our upcoming conference, Applied AI for Distributors, June 4th through 6th at the Chicago Marriott O'Hare. If you haven't signed up, you can't miss this. It's 25 different technology companies talking about AI-enabled capabilities they have today and what's coming up in the future for distributors. I mean, this is the only major event exclusively about AI, exclusively for distributors. Reach out to me and I'll send you a coupon code if you don't have it to give you a little more incentive to attend. We also have a former White House CIO talking about cybersecurity in the age of AI. We've got just a tremendous, we got this SVP and Chief Product Officer at Grainger talking about their journey. And the lineup is just stellar. Go to appliedai4distributors.com or our website, distributionstrategy.com, for more information. So first, Brian, let's talk about what is customer experience. So, well, it's every interaction across all touch points, right? I mean, it's your drivers, your delivery drivers, or even if you have third-party delivery drivers, they have an impact on how your customers think about you. It is a differentiator. I mean, increasingly, everything is available from everywhere online. And so the experience that your customers get has gained differentiation power. And you get CX from seamlessly integrating technology across these touch points and personalizing experiences. So what customer A sees on your website is not what customer B sees. You know, when you're call center people, I know you've run some major call center operations, Brian. You know, when your agents answer the phone, they need to know who they're talking to before they pick up the phone, if possible.
Right.
And they need to have that customer specific information and interests. And it's a huge driver of higher customer satisfaction, loyalty, sales, and profits. So let's jump into that next, but I need to remind everybody, if you have questions, please use the Q&A function and we'll get to them as we go. But let's talk about what is the impact of loyalty? What is the loyalty effect? Okay, so this is a fictional distributor that we created, and this is their last year. And their last year is made up for retained customers. So those were customers that they had 2 years ago and they had last year, right? And then the new customers include anyone who did not buy in the last 12 months. Okay, so for measurement purposes, it doesn't matter if they bought 2 years ago, but the simple measurement is this is the combination of customers who bought 2 years ago and last year and customers who only bought in the last year. All right, and so put it all together, you've got $31.65 million in sales. But unlike most financial analyses, we're going to add in the lost customers, which in this case, you know, we pegged at about 75, right? And about $600,000 in revenue. So this is a pretty conservative model. In fact, we're not gaming the system here. What you'll see on the next slide is that there's actually growth built into that model. If you just reran those numbers year after year, you'd have 6% growth, both in sales and profitability. So, you know, this is not some kind of, bad performing distributor. It's a pretty good performing distributor. But let's say that you delight your customers more than you used to. They like you more because you're doing a better job. You're personalizing, you're offering better capabilities. And let's say you really focus on acquiring new customers, losing fewer customers, and getting a little bit more out of who you've got by a combination of good marketing and really, really effective customer satisfaction. Let's say your new customers because you focus on it now, and importantly, your existing customers are providing word of mouth referrals to their associates, their colleagues, their friends. So you get this good reputation. It's like, wow, you should buy from XYZ Co. They really provide good service. So you start getting more customers, 20 more customers. So instead of 100, you get 120. And if you haven't focused heavily on that before, that's probably pretty achievable. And you're going to do a welcome package because this is part of your customer experience. When people buy from you for the first time, you embrace them, you welcome them, you pull them into the fold. And as a result, they buy 17 times instead of 15 times. And the effect on average order value is it goes up a little bit from $1,100 to $1,150. But we're going to actually give back a little margin because we know you may have to discount to get that extra transaction. So there are some puts and takes in this model. So if you look at the whole new column, that's not an unreasonable set of achievements for your new customers. Retained is even more modest. The only change we're asking for on the upside is we want you to get 31 transactions a year instead of 30 on average, one more order a year. But we realize that may impact margin a little bit. So another give back, we're going to say average order value can go down a little bit. Now on the loss side, the only change we're going to make is we want to reduce your 75 customers lost to 60 because you care so much about them that when they leave, you reach out to them and ask them to, buy from you again. Please don't leave us. And if you do a better job with CX, they're less likely to leave you anyway. So the net effect of that is you actually double your sales growth in a year. So instead of growing 6% with those modest changes, you grow 13%. Now, let's say that's all you do. You never get any better. Forever and ever, you lose 60 customers, you gain 120, you get one more, you get that one extra transaction, not another one each year, just that one, that you have this one-time change where you perform a little better. What happens? In 5 years, your customer is a third bigger. Just from those changes on a one-time basis. You're not improving every year, which by the way, is actually what really happens. In this example, all that's happening is you make this one-time structural change or performance change, and as a result, your company's a third bigger in 5 years. Now, here's the sad part. Almost nobody does this. At most distributors, no one's in charge of customer experience. No one measures customer experience on a consistent basis over time. You may not even have a measurement system, or maybe every 2 years you do some CSAT survey, which is way too late to know what's really going on. I mean, if you do that, it's like flying through the Rockies with an altimeter that gives you your altitude every 30 minutes. I mean, that's not very useful. There are a lot of mountains out there you can run into. No one's setting customer lifecycle goals. No one owns the customer lifecycle goals. No one's measuring customer lifecycle performance. And yet, what's more important than satisfying your customers, attracting new customers, growing existing customers, or keeping the customers that you have? And yet nobody owns it. And how do you know how well you're doing at CX if you don't measure this performance? And think about what you're giving up. This is a chance to make your company a third bigger, or whatever your numbers turn out to be, just by making some good changes in how you interact with customers. So it's a really important measurement. I use this example in my keynotes. I would say, I ask people, how many of you have goals for these? How many of you have someone in charge? How many of you know how you've been performing? Almost no one can raise their hand for all three questions. And yet it's an absolute no-brainer in business. So this is the power and importance of customer experience and marketing, is understanding how well you're serving customers and giving them reasons to come back because they really, really like doing business with you. Brian, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, and I think, one thing I'll say is making those small incremental changes really does make a huge difference. You don't see it until you see the math, but it really makes a huge difference on just small little things you can do over time. So a lot of distributors that I've worked with and worked in really have a really good handle on the operating metrics, right? They know exactly what their will call looks like. They know what their AR looks like. They know what all the different operational metrics are there for, right? So, and they're great, right? Because you can track them. You can be really good at them. They're very internally focused. You can hold people accountable to them. but they're not really that great at telling you whether or not your customer is satisfied or not. Right? Just because your will call times are great and you're shipping, you're shipping things out the door the right way, the right time, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get great satisfaction. So at the end of the day, looking at this by itself does not help, right? The grade that we get is really from the customer. That's the only measurement that is important, is what do they feel about how we're operating versus, what we think we're operating at.
Yeah. I mean, they're not measured, it's so funny because ultimately the grade is given by the customer, right? And
Yeah.
you may think you're doing great, but if your competitor is doing even better, you're losing.
Yeah, and like I said, it's easy to pull that data out of your systems, and it's really simple, and then you don't have to go externally to get it. And again, at the end of the day, you feel good about yourself, but the customer's not feeling real great about it. So what we're going to go into now is really the insights Ian talked about earlier, right? We've looked at over 18,000 responses from 30 different distributors. Now, I'll tell you before we look at this, we do this for your organization, your results will look different, right? Because this is a collection of all of these responses across a lot of different industries and across a lot of different distributors. So it's really great data, and it's really good to see, and it's some really good trends that, again, if we look at this for your company, it will look different, but it'll give you the same level of results. So looking at what NPS, right? Most people know what NPS is, right? So it's the overall question of, would you recommend this, distributor to your friends or family? And it's taking the difference between the promoters and the detractors, right? So in this case, it's 47%. So combined, out of the 18,000 responses over 30 distributors, we're looking at a 47 NPS, which is good, but not great.
We're throwing out the passives, right? So on this scale, the promoters are considered, the very top scorers. The detractors are everyone who's got a score, a lower score, and the passives are like, they're just neutral, and we throw them out.
Yeah, and the big thing, if you pay attention to 47, it looks good, again, good but not great. You're missing the bigger picture, I think, because obviously 47 in total, but you look at some of the individual segments here, and we're looking really good with our distribution customers, but we're looking really bad with our construction customers. And we'll get into a little bit about what's important to them. But ultimately, when you look at this for your organization, you're going to have a similar pattern, right? You're going to have great segments that like you and the ones that don't, right? And that's really the important point, is making sure you understand that rather than just looking at the 47 in total. And then the last thing I'll say about this is the passives really are the ones that you have to pay some attention to, because they're likely or more susceptible to your competition picking them off, right? Because they don't care about you one way or the other. And if the competition has a better experience for them, they'll head that way. So you got to be careful with those as well.
Yeah. And so we have a question here on what is a promoter. Brian, you want to handle that?
So the promoters are the folks that are actively talking about you in a positive way, as opposed to a detractor who are talking to you about in a very negative way. So they're your champions. They're the ones who are most likely to stay loyal. They're the ones who are going to continue to drive your business forward.
Right. So the question is, would you recommend this company to a friend? And it's a 10-point scale. Anyone who rates you a 9 or a 10 is considered a promoter. Anyone who rates you 7 or 8 is considered passive. And anyone who rates you 1 to 6 is considered a detractor. So those are the scores. 9s and 10s only count as your promoters. 6 and below are your detractors. 7 and 8 you throw out as passives.
Yeah, good clarification. Thank you. So when you're looking at the scale of this particular slide, this is the aggregation of the 18,000 and the 30 different distributors. And this is what they're saying about our distribution industry overall. So what's really important here is you take a look at the items that are in the top left and the top right. Now, it doesn't mean that the items that are here at the bottom left are any less important, because if you look at the scale of this, you can see that in this case, easy to use website still is almost an 8 in level of importance. and it's pretty low down on the satisfaction that they have, right? So that's how you want to look at this particular scale. So what we're doing really well at is customer service and sales reps. And this is pretty universal across all industries, right? So we're doing a good job at the front lines to get a good experience. We're having, great conversations, and our sales reps and service people are doing a great job. And again, I talked a little bit about the website, right? So the website scores are very low compared to some of the other items that are still important to distributors. So it's very important that website and ease and usability of your website is, something that you're focusing on, because it's cross industries that we're seeing some of this trend. Technical expertise, that's another one where we see some pretty good high scores in terms of what's important and how they're satisfied with that. So that's a really good sign. We'll get into some of the individual industries and roles that we have identified, and you'll see that doesn't show up as highly in some of those. So it's important to know that this gets to a level of detail where you can see it at the high level. It might be great, but some of the other industries you might have some issues with it. Inventory ability, the availability is no secret, right? It's always been up there as a very high importance. And, quite frankly, lately it's not great in terms of satisfaction. It's literally moved into, second place in terms of overall importance to customers is, do you have the product, right? Price is number one, availability is ranked number two. So it's really important, right, that's across all industries that we're kind of struggling with inventory availability.
Well, actually, Brian, here, I think inventory availability is number one, right? And then competitive price, then customer service, then competitive price. So pricing is third, inventory available is first, customer service is next, competitive price is third. But let me point something out on this chart, because we do something that a lot of people don't do, which we don't just measure satisfaction, we measure importance. And that's a really important nuance of our approach that we've developed over, 20 years of working in consulting, and, in my case, 30 something years of 40 years of working in distribution. Actually, it's 40 now.
Seems like a long time.
No, 35. But so this is really important, because a lot of times when people do surveys, they ask about how they're doing in terms of performance in different areas. How good is my delivery? How good is my returns process? How good is my pricing, et cetera? But you have to calibrate that against how important that is to the customer, because you might say, oh my gosh, our returns process got a low rating. But if that also is relatively unimportant to customers, then improving that's not going to drive your NPS score like improving something where you may actually be performing better, but it's much, much more important to customers. So that's why the importance on the y-axis is just as important as the satisfaction on the x-axis. And that's just something that we do that we just don't see other researchers or customer satisfaction systems do, is calibrating what's really going to drive my NPS. It's not just moving up things that are low satisfaction. It's moving up things that are lower satisfaction, but are also very, very highly important.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And the colors here are different, right? So the darker the green, the higher correlation that particular item has to a higher NPS, right? So if we get better at proximity, it's important to customers, and we're not great at it, but it's not highly correlated to an overall NPS as customer service would be.
Right. And so Joe's got a question. He says, how do you really weigh the price element? That is one that many times everyone fails, even a good vendor. Where should price come in, and how do you trust the responses? So first of all, I do think there is a bias where people will generally tell you you're not competitive on price because they want you to lower your prices, Joe, which I think is what you're referring to. And yet even with that, it came in third overall, right? I would say, if you look at the 4 P's of marketing, product, price, promotion, place is how you get paid back for the other 3, right? So if you do a phenomenal job serving customers, they're more willing to pay higher prices. And you look at like very high performing distributors. I mean, like Fastenal is not noted for their low prices. Neither is Grainger, right? But they've really dialed in their value proposition on a certain segment, or in Grainger's case, more of a type of situation in many cases where I really need it now. And people become more tolerant of paying higher prices. So I think, you got to realize that you're never going to probably get a fantastic score on pricing. What's important is that you have the feedback to understand what you need to do to improve to make customers more willing to pay higher prices. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point, because that's the other thing this tool does, and you'll see over the course of this next few minutes, is it gives you some action to take, right? To what do you focus on first? Because most distributors just don't have all the endless time in the world and endless resources in the world to attack everything at once. So this gives you some real insight about what's most important and what do you get after first.
Yeah, and Joe has a follow-on question. So you shouldn't feel too bad if your price isn't top rated. Almost good not to be great on price. I think that's right. I think if people love your prices, then you're leaving margin on the table.
Great point. All right, so we're going to get a little bit into some of the nuance around the tool, right? So I mentioned earlier that the NPS at a 47 is great, and some things are more important to other industries and other roles than others, right? So if we look at manufacturing, you know, a critical need for inventory.
Construction here.
Oh, it's construction, sorry. Construction. It's a considerable need for inventory, right? Because these guys work in hours, minutes, seconds, and inventory is important, right? And they need to have a really good, reliable, and especially in a branch-based distribution organization, a reliable will call counter experience. So it's really important they have products when you need them, when they need them, and they need the right, assortment of products in stock. So it's extremely important. So I'll tell a quick story about a guy named Steve Feigl, who was a Grainger rep at our Chicago branch, and he was the only contractor rep in the whole city before he got focused on. And he told me early in my career, if you can't get the little things right with contractors, they're never going to give you a shot at the bigger things. Mm-hmm. So this highlights for me that if they show up and you don't have that one thing they need to fix and you get the job done complete, they're not coming back to you for the big projects. All right. So it's really important that inventory is set for these guys, and that will call counter assistance is there for them. And it's hard, right? It's probably one of the hardest positions to fill in a branch is the will call counter person, because they have to be good at everything. Be good at product, they have to be good at technical, they have to be good at customer service. And those guys are retiring, so it's really hard to replace those. So it's a critical need for contractors, but it's also one of the most difficult for distributors to fill. Sorry about that technical difficulty. So manufacturing, what's really important to those guys is uptime, right? So downtime is big dollars. So they've got to have the inventory in place to be able to support those manufacturing levels. And competitive pricing, it's moving its way up, right? It used to not be such a critical thing because it was more important to have the right inventory, but it's still becoming now a more effective piece of our strategies, have a better price for this group. We're really doing well with those guys again is in customer service and our sales reps, and tech expertise for these guys. We're doing pretty well with those. So it's some pretty good story on the service side. It's not a great story in terms of availability and price on the other.
Yeah, this is why though, it's like your data could vary, right? Well, it will vary for sure. The question is how much, right? So if you don't have competitive technical expertise, then what that means is you have a gap compared to the norms in the marketplace.
Yeah, exactly. So the institutional guys, they're the most tech savvy out of all of the industries, right? So what's really important to them is inventory availability, competitive price, like everybody else, but technical support is really important, and the assortment, right? Because they're used to having marketplaces. They're used to being able to find what they need, and we're not doing as well with them. So they have a lot more visibility to pricing. They're a lot more sensitive to it. But despite, the gaps that we see there, delivery is doing really well with them. Customer service and professional sales reps, again, those have led the way through each one of these sectors.
It's a demanding group. I mean, the bottom of the scale is still 7.5, right? So, they're very demanding.
So in this particular section of this, we focus on the roles, right? Because we often get tied up into the folks that we're used to doing business with, and we don't necessarily focus on the personas. So the tool does a really good job of making sure we understand NPS from the industry level, but also more importantly from, the different roles, right? So we focus on the people who buy stuff from us, the people who use it, the management of people who actually buy things. And then it's really important to look at each one of these, because you can be doing really well with your operations team, right? But if you don't get the bills right, your finance team is not going to be that happy with you. And as I was talking to Jonathan earlier today, you have no idea what influence the finance person has in the organization, right? If you're doing great on the customer front end of things and the finance person isn't happy with you, then you're not necessarily going to have a good overall NPS with this customer, right? So that's why it's important to look at different personas, because we need to have a full view of who's buying from us and who cares about what we do.
Yeah, look at senior management.
Yeah,
they're almost half your sales and marketing customers. So, and so if you're doing major agreements, national accounts, major accounts agreements, then you really need to know how your senior management customers are thinking of you, because in this case, your operations people are much, much happier than your senior managers. But who's going to sign that major accounts agreement?
right. Well, and it goes to, some distributors some sales reps have a hard time making it past the people that they normally do business with, right? So are they telling the value proposition to the right levels of the organization? So are those senior executives or senior level leaders hearing what you do well and understanding what you do well?
Yeah, that's a great point, right? I mean, do you know what they're expecting, what they're demanding, and are you delivering? I mean, in this case, it looks like overall distributors could do a much better job winning over senior executives.
Exactly. So our operations team, right? They need stuff to keep things running, right? This is one of the most important jobs they have, is making sure operations continue to run. So for these guys, obviously, inventory availability is the highest ranking thing, but you can see it's only a 6.4 in our performance. So again, really it tells a story, a lot of different customers, but competitive price and inventory availability are really important.
Yeah, and this is a tough area for distributors, right? Because working capital is the lifeblood of your financial outcomes. And so I see distributors, I think, sometimes get too aggressive with not carrying inventory. They'll say, hey, with this one manufacturer, we're just going to start carrying the top 50 SKUs and the rest are going to be drop shipped from the manufacturer. And you're basically trying to turn your manufacturer into a distributor. And you really need to be careful with that, because first of all, you're teaching those manufacturers how to become distributors. And secondly, you're not, you're kind of getting out of the distribution business. So you have to be careful with inventory availability. I think getting the right tools in, the right software in, and the right people in to manage working capital well is essential, but you can't get out of the distribution business by dumping your inventory. You can take that too far pretty quickly. Yeah,
especially for this group, right? And it's important to also, point out again the scale on this, right? Because you see will call counter assistance, it appears that it's in the kind of lower left quadrant and it's not that important, but still almost at 8.5 that they care about it, and they're not having a great experience, it looks like.
And this varies a lot by distributor, because some distributors hardly do any or no will call. Others, I mean, if you sell to service contractors, those customers are going to rate this super, super high. So you got to know what's important to in your business.
So I talked a little bit about finance earlier, right? And what's important to them. And, surprise, surprise, inventory availability is important to them, right? You wouldn't necessarily think about that if you were thinking at the high level, but all of a sudden it shows up that that's an important thing. Price obviously is a big deal, right? Because that's what they're used to dealing with, but inventory ability and price is a huge thing again with them. And, the good news is customer service is doing well again, and professional sales reps. So it's really important for that group. And, the website is a relatively low satisfaction, right? So they're probably spending some time on your website and they're not having a great experience with it. Whether you can build, self-serve tools into your website that allow them to go pull their own information, there's a lot of credence to that, and that's what they're looking for.
So we have a question from Michael. Easy use website seems to stay low. Why do you think it ranks so low? So I think there's two parts to that answer. One, get back to the scale. Even here, easy to use website is a 7.75. Okay, so it's not that low. It's just the scale doesn't go to 0. The second thing is, I think to some degree, distribution customers have just kind of assumed distributors aren't going to have great websites. And actually, if they need to buy it online, a lot of times they're going to go elsewhere. So they're like, well, I don't really think of my distributor for that particular purchase because I need it online and the distributor's website is not easy to use. So I think it's a lot more important than it looks because of the scale. And secondly, if people don't even think of you for that anymore, they're going to say, well, it's not that important because I just go to Amazon Business or Grainger or whatever.
Yeah, they might use your website to search, but they're actually calling or emailing an order versus putting it through the website because it's not that easy to do. So we talked about senior management, right? It's no surprise senior management's the harshest critic. They usually are. They put that greatest emphasis on inventory availability, right? Because to them, it has a direct impact on their revenue and their satisfaction of their customers, right? And how well their operations are working. So it's a huge portion for them, and clearly price, right? Again, shows up again. And senior executives based on overall NPS, and then you look at some of the lagging factors is, they have unmet needs and expectations for certain, right? So we need to do a better job of doing what they need us to do, but also maybe communicating what we do and how we do it, as I said earlier. So we just need to do a better job of selling the value proposition to them, because maybe there's perceptions out there that they just don't understand. But they're our harshest critic, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So we took a look at customer size, right? Because that's important, right? And most distributors focus very heavily on their large customers, rightly so. So it doesn't show up as a huge surprise that we're doing really well with them. We put all the resources, we put all the inventory towards them. We may be assigning specific people, to handle some of these large customers. So the experience may feel a little better in person, right? And that shows up in the scores. Where it really starts to fall apart a little bit is our small and mediums, right? Because our small and medium customers, we're consistently trying to drive, small to medium and medium to large with different activities, outbound campaigns, marketing campaigns, inside sales, trying to drive that revenue higher. But you can see the small and medium customers, they need better price availability and assortment. They need us to have a better will call counter experience. Right. So we're doing really well with them in terms of service overall and how much technical support we give them. But we need to make sure that we're trying to satisfy those customers as well to try to grow them into larger customers.
Yeah, and there's a lot more margin in small and medium customers. I mean, if you can lower the cost to serve and deal with them efficiently, you can really expand your margins by selling a lot more to small and medium customers.
So we'll talk a little bit about, now we've kind of look at some of the data, what are some of the best practices that we've seen out there, right? Because it's important to learn from others and learn what we can do differently to potentially move our individual businesses forward. And some of you, and maybe most of you have done journey mapping before, but this is a really critical component of operational excellence and understanding how your customers buy from you and trying to get really good at that. Like understanding each one of these touch points. I've seen some really cool journey mapping where things show up where the organization didn't have any idea, right, that they were having issues with this particular point in the process, right? But all of a sudden you do the work and it shows up, and that's where it shows up in your NPS. Having the right data strategy, right? We talked earlier about operational metrics aren't the be all end all. They're important because you want to make sure you're efficient and you're doing what you do. But, having CX measurements are equally as important, if not more, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what matters most. The best organizations have a CI process and plan, right? So they're able to take these changes, move them into the CI world, make sure they've got continuous improvement tools to track those issues, understand root cause and fix, right? Because that's the most important thing, is you figure out what's happening and you go to fix them. Again, the best organizations have a cross-functional mindset. You know, this is not always easy, and it's real simple to get locked into silos on the day-to-day work, but having that cross-functional collaboration is really, really important. And then these regular feedbacks, right? You can't do a survey once every 3 years and call it good, or even once a year. It may not be enough, right? So you have to be able to do the survey, understand where your touch points are, what your issues are, do some work to fix those, and then do the survey again, make sure it made the difference.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because sometimes in my keynotes, well, I have stopped asking this because it turns out to embarrass the audience. Sometimes I'll ask people, when's the last time you bought from your own company? How many of you bought in the last month?
It's a great
and
question.
3 months and 6 months and 12. And you could see the sheepishness in the crowd, right? It's like, I mean, how do you know what it's like to be a customer of yours if you're not being a customer of yours and doing mystery shopping? I mean, when's the last time you went on your website and bought something and did something, you know, difficult, like order in you know, quantity that's different than the cell pack to see how the organization responds, right? And you know, I think, you know, it's very easy to become insular when you're in the home office, right? Where it feels like you're just detached from the business. So you have to force the issue in your organization to sample yourself. You know, it's this combination of qualitative feedback and quantitative input that helps you know what it's like to be your own customer and again, the grade on your performance comes from the customer, not from you.
Yeah. You know, and I'll tell a little story. You know, Mike Pulick at Grainger back in the day literally forced everybody in the back office to go visit customers and spend time in the field, right? To try to create that culture of, even though you're sitting in you know, the Grainger office building or any distributor's home office, you're as critical to the customer as, you know, the sales rep or the customer service agent.
Right.
So Ian talked a little bit earlier, and I think he made a great case about why CX and investments are important. They have a tremendous impact on the P&L, right? And having somebody own that customer lifecycle model is hugely important, because it can't just be marketing's effort. It has to be efforts of the entire organization to be better at that, right? Because somebody has to own it, but it has to be part of the entire organization's DNA. You know, making sure you understand what doing nothing costs you, right? Because that's a big thing. It's hard. This is hard work, and it's hard sometimes to look at the things that don't work or the things that you have to be better at. And it's even harder to try to find the resource to fix it. Right. So that's where you really have to balance. If you do nothing, what happens? Right. And you can see that doing nothing is going to put you behind your competitors, because your competitors are doing something about it. You know, making sure you align those initiatives, the CX initiatives, to the wallet, right? How much is this going to add to the bottom line? What is this going to do to help you grow your markets, grow your wallet share? What are the improvements going to make? So you tie those two things together so that everybody understands the financial bottom line impact of doing this stuff. Because it's not just fun to do, and it's great to create some projects and work in an organization. It has to mean something to the bottom line.
And this is where that model that we opened up with comes into play. That's a very simple way of understanding. It's like, am I keeping the customers I have? Am I growing the customers I've got? And am I acquiring new customers because they've got this fantastic reputation in the marketplace?
You know, and it's really critical to create a benchmark for this. And you can't do it again by doing it one time every 3 years and hoping it makes a difference, right? This has got to be a march over time about how are you doing relative to your competitors and relative to the industry on very specific things. And you'll see something at the end that gives a little bit of a benchmark, you know, if you continue to do surveys over a regular period. And then the really hard thing is just use the pilots, right? Just use small things, start early, get some momentum, really make sure you get some value out of it, but really start something, right? That you know is broke and you know you need to fix. but get the momentum in the organization centered around making these small incremental improvements. And data, right? This is something that is really, really new in terms of personalization and digitization, right? We talked 2 weeks ago on CRM, and what CRMs are able to do now is really be able to hone in on personalizing experiences. You know, I'll harken back to your marketing days, Ian, when, you know, somebody would say, look, we've got a whole bunch of gloves left in excess. Everybody go out and sell gloves.
Right.
And you get
right.
people on the front lines trying to sell it, and they'd be like, this customer doesn't care.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
we've come such a long way, and it's even getting better and better. And being able to put recommendations in front of people, you know, that matter, you know, putting marketing messages and promotions that individuals matter versus just, let's just throw a promotion out there in general. So these are great new tools, and more of these are coming available that allow you to, again, personalize the experience. So it feels like I'm delivering this to you as a person, and not necessarily just because you called me as a company.
Right. So you go back one. I think what's interesting is whether you're talking about, you know, working capital, inventory performance that we mentioned earlier, personalization, digitalization, AI is changing the game on these tools. And your competitors are adopting these new tools that deliver better performance because they learn and get better over time. That's the difference between AI and older technologies is they improve on their own.
Yeah.
They get better on their own. And, you know, another plug for our conference, you're going to learn. We have technology companies presenting capabilities in all these areas and more at our conference. You have competitors going to that conference, and they're going to get ahead of you. So, you know, you can't fall behind on AI, whether it's our conference or something else. You can't fall behind on AI. We do have a couple of questions. Mike says, when was the last time you searched for products and found your website like a customer would? Right. So, right. I mean, in addition to go beyond your website, search your products on search engines and see where do you come up, right? And how does your website compare and how you offer those offerings versus other websites or best-in-class competitors? I mean, these are research activities that should be ongoing in your company. Joe is asking, have you guys found a good way to solicit NPS data from customers other than a targeted survey, something that is regularly pulsing customers? Many retailers do it via text, etc. Yet, how can a distributor be successful in soliciting it? So let's jump into the next section, Joe, because I think it's going to answer some of these questions. So we actually do have good luck with surveys, and we think it's a matter of how you structure the survey. You got to keep it brief. It's got to come from the distributor, ideally anyway, not from a third party if you can avoid it. You sometimes have to provide an incentive, right? And in the scheme of things, these incentives are cheap. But you know, you have to be realistic that you're asking people for their time. So sometimes you have to give them a, you know, $5 Starbucks card or whatever. They don't need a lot, but they need something sometimes. And if you're not oversampling them, I mean, so 3 years is too much, you know, but there's also this Pulse NPS that some people do, which I address on this slide. And Pulse NPS is really problematic because Pulse at the bottom bullet there shows transaction satisfaction. It doesn't show relationship satisfaction. Periodic surveys, whether you do them, you know, 2, 3, 4 times a year, they really help you understand how good your relationships are with customers because it's the sum of their experiences with you, not just how happy was I with that one simple transaction. The other problem with Pulse surveys is you're oversampling the people who like you the most because those are the people who buy from you the most. So what we see is we do Pulse NPS, and we think it's useful if you want to kind of spot problems with specific transactions. But you're going to wind up with a very, very high NPS versus a periodic survey. And what we're seeing is that's 20 points higher. So we'll talk to people that go, yeah, my NPS is an 83. And instantly, you know, on almost every case, that's a Pulse survey. Meaning by Pulse survey, I mean every time that you interact with them, they send you like a 1-5 question or one question with on a 10-point scale. You know, were you fully satisfied, or would you recommend Delta Airlines to a friend or whatever? I mean, you get these all the time. I mean, to the point where it's almost overwhelming. Right? You get them in the doctor's office. How good was your check-in experience? Right? You know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's of limited value. It's not without value, but it's limited value. And so rather than doing texts, which I don't know about you, but I'm getting annoyed with these commercial texts that I get, I think thoughtful surveys that take 5 minutes, administered 2, 3, 4 times a year, usually with an incentive. We've been like you've seen, we've got 18,500 responses in the last year and a half, and we're not having a really difficult time getting people to respond. But it's important that you go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, it's that Goldilocks effect that we talk about, right? It's the right length, it's the right time, right? And you ask the right questions, and we get more than double the amount of response you would get in a typical survey, right? Which is pretty impactful. And we get people in the high 90s when they start it, they finish it. And that's another piece of it. That's a big deal that gives you the right information.
Yeah. A couple remarks. Ron is saying, I know all the talk about AI and all the technology that is now in play for distributors, but it's really critical to focus on customer service. We can't lose sight of that. I agree. Susan, hi Ian, can you discuss the success of the survey when it's coming from the distributor versus a third party? I've heard that customers will be more truthful with a third party. Have you seen different? Yeah, actually, we see the response rate so much better when it comes from you versus a third party, because there's so much suspicious email now that if it doesn't come from a sender who I know, I'm much less likely to answer the question. So look, as long as you're doing it on a consistent basis and you understand your performance versus competitors, and you understand your trend, coming from you is fine, because your people are more likely to trust the email. They know they're doing business with you. So we haven't really found that to be a problem. Also, I think it's just the norm in NPS for it to come from the provider. It's just sort of the accepted way that it happens. So I think people are used to seeing it now. But here's the other limiting factor, not only with pulse surveys, but with a lot of NPS surveys to begin with. It's just a raw score. It doesn't give you any diagnostic or prescriptive information, right? It's like you go to the doctor and the doctor says, ooh, you have a temperature of 102. Well, okay, now what? Right? I mean, how come, right? I mean, what do I need? A blood panel, an MRI, and a CAT scan? I mean, there's got to be more to it than that. I can't really, taking Tylenol might just mask the problem. Okay. Also, there are some problems for which there is no temperature. I mean, if I have high blood pressure, that doesn't give me an elevated temperature. So NPS is a very useful measurement. It's a good way to be comparative against other organizations. It doesn't actually tell you what's wrong with you or what you should do about it.
All right. So the takeaways that we've seen out of all of this data and all of the time we spent with different distributors is it's really important to get real with what's going on in your customer culture. Right. Sometimes it's not fun or not easy to look at the ugly stuff, but it's something you have to face. Sometimes it's not pretty, but it's one of those things that you have to confront the things that aren't working right. So it's really important that, we're honest and truthful about what's actually happening. And we engage the people doing the work, right? Those are the people who see the problems first. They'll be the first ones to tell you when you visit a branch or a location what's not working. So those are the folks that you need to have in your team, making sure they're engaged and giving you that insight. And companies who take this and really look at it differently than just a cost to be managed, that it's a strategic investment in making sure that your organization continues to grow and thrive. These are the companies that are succeeding with CX, right? The ones who don't just view it as a cost center that I've got to try to squeeze as much cost out as possible. And I talked about this earlier, small improvements, right? Over time, fix the basic stuff. You can talk to a handful of people and you'll know almost immediately what those little things are that need to be fixed if you don't already know them already. So it's start by fixing those basics, getting that working, and then taking a more deep dive into some of the more complicated problems. And, we talked earlier about the advances in AI and analytics, right? So take the leap. You're going to have to do it, right? It's not always easy and it's a little scary sometimes, but monitor and experiment with specific things in your organization that make a difference, because it's coming. And it's one of those things that you have to just start dipping your toe in the water and start somewhere. And the conference is going to be, again, a great way for you to learn how to do this in a way that makes sense for your organization. And at the end of the day, true transformation here just takes time, and it takes commitment, and it takes energy and focus, and it's not easy, and it's a constant battle to get better. So it's one of those things that it has to always be forefront. And when you have a customer first culture, that's always there anyway. So it's really important that that's the biggest takeaway here is it just takes time and it takes your commitment to do it.
Hey, we have another question. What are your thoughts on conducting customer satisfaction survey cold calls? Do you feel this is an effective method to get more information from the client? Yeah, I mean, I think it's better to do ride-alongs actually, because
Mhm.
I think you get more substantive discussions because people are expecting you if
Yeah.
you're with a rep who's organized. But I think generally speaking, making calls to people and saying, "Hey, how are we doing?" That's appreciated as long, it's not a sales call, right? They're honestly, if you're honestly seeking feedback and advice, most people will be friendly if they're available to talk. So yeah, I think it's the problem is it's not structured. And one thing about research is it needs to be administered in a consistent way for you to have reliable results that you can track over time. But I think blending in cold calls for customer satisfaction makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, especially like I talked earlier, if you're getting people that are from the back office riding with sales reps and visiting branches and being out in front of customers, I think that's a great way to get some feedback as well.
Yeah. Okay, so we absolutely love distribution. As I like to say, I love the smell of a warehouse in the morning. For those of you who are old enough to remember Apocalypse Now, um, and so the Jonathan Bine, who's my business partner, has invented this tool, Customer Experience RX. And this is a panel that our customers actually have access to. It's a portal, actually. And you can sort by industry, job function, geography, et cetera, and look at all the charts that we showed you today. You can actually get them for your company sorted in all these different ways. And on the top left is actually a benchmarking diagram. So this distributor is the blue dot. It's the first time they've done NPS. So it shows, that's why there's only one dot. Over time, they'll accumulate a line like some of the others. As we accumulate customers pretty soon, there'll be lots and lots of comparative lines, but at least they can see how they're doing versus the aggregate of other similar distributors. They don't know who those distributors are because that's anonymous. But it's a fantastic tool that Jonathan invented. There's nothing like it. I've been a VP marketing for 4 publicly held distributors. I would have, paid a lot of money, a lot more than we charge, by the way,
Yes.
to have access to this data, right? And you can, it's a really, it takes that that top right score, which is the temperature check, right? And it says, here's the MRI and everything that's going on with your company, right? From the customer's perspective, how are you doing across your service channels, telephone, customer service, et cetera? Here's how you're performing in terms of your value-added services. And you can get it by customer industries, customer job functions, customer geographies. And Jonathan's made this super easy. It's turnkey and you can implement in just a few hours. So if you want to get serious about customer experience and really drive that customer loyalty in a way that I demonstrated in that early spreadsheet, you need to give us a call or reach out to us because Jonathan or Brian can demo this tool for you. It's fantastic, and you can choose 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 times a year, whatever you want to do. It's very inexpensive and it's super easy to implement. You implement it in hours on your side. This is not a big project. We've done all the heavy lifting so that it's no longer a project for distributors. It's just an easy way to see how you're doing with your projects.
I definitely wish I had it when I was running some customer service organizations. That's for sure.
Yeah. So we have a question. Is there a URL for Customer Experience RX? I just did a search and didn't see one. Yeah, you can go to distributionstrategy.com. At the top, there's a choice for analytics. Under analytics, you can find Customer Experience RX. There's a bunch of information about it there, Brian. But if you can't find it, just reach out to us on our website, or you can email Jonathan Bine, jbein, Jbein, at distributionstrategy.com. Okay, 2 upcoming programs. One on May 22nd, we have a technology leader panel called Boosting Your Profits with Technology. We got a couple of real technology thought leaders, Graham Smith, who's a business development manager at Esker, and Frank Heenan, who's the group VP for distribution and lumber and building materials for Epicor. That'll be an absolutely fascinating discussion. We always learn a lot when we have these technology leaders on, so make sure you sign up for that. Next slide is our next program, which is on May 29th, Unleashing the Power of Technology in Sales, Transform Your Strategy. Jacoby Zagruski, who's the VP of Business Architecture at Luminous Labs, Chris Van Ittersum at Supply Mover, and Kristen Tom, our friend over at White Cup. So this is really more about using technology in sales, and we'll have a significant AI component as well. So if you have any more questions, put them in now. Otherwise, thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, let us know. You will get a link to these slides. We really appreciate you joining us, and reach out if we can help you. Brian, nice job today, my friend. Always good working with you.
You too, sir. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye now.